We are now live. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2021 UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. We will start the session in just a couple of minutes. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2021 UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. This session is titled Way Forward in the Regional Response for the Elimination of Worst Forms of Child Labor. I'm Kavya Rizal from Q Design, and I will be your technical facilitator today. Both the chat function and the Q&A function will be on, so if you have any questions for the speakers, please do use the Q&A function. Please note that today's session is recorded. If you have any questions about Zoom or require any technical assistance, please feel free to privately message me at tf_kavya_rizal_qdesign for help using the chat box. Thank you again for joining us for the 2021 UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. I will now hand over to Gabriela Kuhn. Gabriela, the floor is all yours.
Thank you for this introduction, and good morning and a very warm welcome to all the participants and the panelists of today's session. We are going to discuss the way forward in the regional response for the elimination of worst forms of child labor. My name is Gabriela Kuhn, and I'm head of program at ECPAT International. That is a network of over 120 organizations working on ending all forms of sexual exploitation of children. And it's my pleasure to moderate this session today. I would like to encourage all the attendees. You can submit your questions at any time through the Q&A box, and we will take some of these in the second half of the session. So let me give a brief background and introduce our excellent four panelists. First, we will hear from Shrinkala Thapa, who is the regional coordinator for South Asia for ECPAT International. Shrinkala will spotlight key findings from a regional analysis that covers Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. The analysis discusses specific and practical recommendations for governments on how to improve legal and policy frameworks to address more effectively the crime of sexual exploitation of children in as much as the worst form of child labor, and how to support also businesses in that. And these recommendations are based on a 24 points legal checklist that was composed for governments with suggestions for interventions they should consider to adopt if they have not done so already, to improve their national frameworks and to create enabling environments for business to protect children both online and offline. So Shrinkala will give a snapshot of the current landscape in the region and discuss key recommendations that are in line with the UN Guiding Business Principles and the Children's Rights and Business Principles framework. Second, we will hear from Sumnima Tuladhar, Executive Director of SWIN Nepal, that is an advocacy organization that focus on children living and working under the most difficult circumstances. She will give us an insight on the current situation in Nepal. SWIN addresses critical child protection issues that include child labor, sexual exploitation, trafficking, and online abuse of children, as well as broader factors that contribute to exploitation of children. That includes poverty, lack of access to education and healthcare. And she will give us a groundwork perspective reflecting how the gaps in legal and policy frameworks actually affect the lives of children in Nepal. Then we will have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Rinchen Chopal, who is Director General of South Asia Initiative to End Violence Against Children, SAIVAC, that is driving this agenda in 8 countries of the region. Dr. Rinchen is also currently a member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and he will discuss how the challenges presented by Shrinkala and Sumnima can and are being addressed in the region. 2021 marks the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor, and we are looking forward to hearing from a representative of the ILO, Insaf Nizam, who is a specialist at ILO South Asia Sub-Regional Office in New Delhi and works on elimination of child labor, forced labor, as well as discrimination at work and other topics. Insaf will give us a comprehensive coverage on the issues of child labor and its worst forms and discuss a way forward for creating enabling environments to put an end to exploitation of children. So thank you once again for joining us. And let me turn to our first panelist, Shrinkala. So as I mentioned, based on ECPAT regional analysis for South Asia, can you give us an overview how children are falling victims to worse forms of child labor through gaps in national and legal policy frameworks, and how this should be addressed by governments and businesses in the region? Over to you, Shrinkala.
Thank you, Gabriella, and hello to everybody, esteemed panelists and attendees. Like my colleague Gabriella mentioned, ECPAT has been actively working globally, and I just want to give a brief background as what ECPAT is doing in South Asia. In South Asia, we are covering all countries except Afghanistan because we don't have a member in Afghanistan, but in rest of the countries, we have members. So basically, we work through our members, and then we work with intergovernmental organizations like SAIVAC and SARC in South Asia. So while working with the intergovernmental organization, it was really important to engage with them in a way where policy frameworks are well framed to be applicable for the region. And ECPAT being one of ECPAT's mandate being working on addressing sexual abuse exploitation, and SecTT being one of the core of what we do, we started working with SAIVAC, and we did a legal checklist of what exists in the region. In the region, how we started is we started to work with SAIVAC to develop a regional action plan to address sexual abuse exploitation and ensure online safety of children, and SecTT as well. So while doing this, we work with all member countries, and then we started to focus on more on how we should be working together to ensure protection of children in the region. And with SecTT checklist, we covered 6 countries basically. We analyzed the legal situation and the legislation in Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And like my colleague Gabriella mentioned, we worked through and looked into 24 majors, which were the main key points where we were kind of analyzing how the situation, legal situation to ensure protection of children is in these countries. So basically we found major gaps in terms of engagement when it comes to travel and tourism. It was found that in all 6 countries, the protection mechanism when it comes to protecting children in this travel and tourism sector was heavily missing. Some of the countries had more comprehensive laws and policies that provided protection, but basically our analysis kind of brought in a very grave kind of a scenario But saying that, I won't be very negative about, the progress in the region in terms of commitment from the governments, in terms of how the policies that are framed regionally are kind of, um, taken forward at the national level. And some countries have developed national action plans, including SecTT as one of the key elements to ensure protection of children within travel and tourism. And I would also say that the governments, I think what is more important is involving the governments and engaging the governments in all that we are doing. For example, Dr. Rinchen will also shed more light on the regional action plan and the national action plans. For example, the regional action plan that we have for South Asia that is led by SAIVAC on sexual abuse exploitation, we have seen very positive follow-up or commitment from the governments. At least in Sri Lanka and Nepal, the governments were the lead in development of national action plans that incorporates the mandates that we have at the regional level. And some of the recommendations from our SecTT analysis to the governments is, the government should adopt legislations that are comprehensively covering the SEC offenses and including SecTT, and provide more clear definitions in accordance with protection. And it should also ensure the rights of the victims when it comes to victims or offenses related to SecTT. Governments should also revise sexual content laws so that it's, the exploitative situation involving children are disguised from non-exploitative ones. And children are treated as victims and not offenders, because we have seen that many of times victims are treated as offenders by the legislations, which should be kind of looked into more seriously to ensure protection of children. And one of the key things that we as ICPAT, as a group that works to ensure protection of children, we think it has to be more commitment from the government where legislations are there, but the implementation aspect has to be really strengthened. And one key thing that we have started to look, or we are finding it now, is more on the grooming aspect, which is more, physical grooming, and with the situation, and it already existed, but with COVID situation, it has more exacerbated the online grooming of children for the purpose of exploitation. So these are few things that we have we would like to highlight, and with the forums like this, we want to underline the importance of looking into these aspects to ensure protection of children, and how we see that private sector and protection of children kind of go hand in hand. Because, when we're saying SecTT, it's travel and tourism, and it's more of a business setting where children are exploited. But, if there is commitment from both sides, we can really work together to ensure protection of children, at the same time involve the governments to make sure that legislations and laws and policies are more stronger, and the offenders of these kind of offenses are more punished in terms of law. And we also see that one of the things that is very important is the inter-country exchanges and the relationship that we have. And many of the countries don't have extradition treaties that allows the victims from one country to other, or the offender from one country to other country to be dealt in by the governments of these countries. And these are few flaws that we see, but then we also see the positive side that, if we work together and come together, governments are kind of open to work with us. So this has been experience of ICPAT kind of engaging with regional entities and doing the analysis. And we also planned to bring this checklist as part of the monitoring process for regional action plan. And we will kind of keep taking it forward from here on, and work with SAVAG and SARC to kind of ensure that this checklist is part of the regional action plan, so that we have more concrete base to advocate with the governments to kind of showcase what the situation is like. So this serves as a document that is more evidence-based document that can be the evidence that we advocate with the governments, but at the same time, it can also serve as a monitoring tool for us, and then keep a check on where things have improved, because once the governments are on board and things are moving forward positively, then we can also use it as a tool to see, this could be the baseline for what the situation is like, and then we could have more of see the progress as where the countries are moving forward in terms of ensuring protection of children in SecTT, and how business and the private sector and governments and civil society organizations should work together to ensure protection of children, especially from sexual abuse, exploitation in these settings.
Thank you, Shrinkrala, and thank you for giving this overview and the current landscape. Indeed, it's critical that the governments have adequate legal and policy frameworks, and also that the businesses are legally bound to respect children's rights in the context of travel and tourism, but also with all its online elements, as it's closely interrelated. So they strengthen legal frameworks, adopt regulatory measures for the industries, including also such issues as voluntarism that is not very strongly regulated in the region, and allows for uncontrolled and unvetted access to children that puts them at risk. But Tunima will talk more also about these elements. In fact, the legal checklist is practical guidance for governments, and it was already adopted by Asian Interparliamentary Assembly in Southeast Asia as a mechanism to better protect children and track progress. And it will be used also in other regions. And it's available online. And I see Damian has shared the link to the legal checklist that everybody can consult. Thank you very much, Shrinkrala. I will now turn to Sunima, Executive Director of TWIN in Nepal. Sunima, considering the regional snapshot that was presented by Shrinkrala, can you give us your country insights backed by some specific examples? And also, could you tell us more what is already being done in Nepal to protect children in cooperation with the private sector? Over to you.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Shrinkrala, for the overview. And as a South Asian subcontinent, all of us have common challenges in the entire child protection issue itself. No, when we are talking about worst forms of child labor in our subcontinent, and sexual exploitation of children, and then exploitation of children in travel and tourism sector, then so many paths actually come across, and there are so many similarities within our countries, and with Nepal and India specifically, because we share the border and share so many similar cultures and traditions. So many issues are similar, including the issue children are facing and we are facing in the travel and tourism sector, because in our part of the world, what we are trying to do is projecting tourism as one of the best sources of foreign income for our country. And in Nepal, we planned 2020 as Visit Nepal year. And we were very, very anxious that how many, travelers, tourists are coming, and how safe our children going to be. And it's kind of good that it didn't happen due to the COVID-19 situation, but definitely we suffered a great financial backlash. But at the same time, I think so many children got protected because this halting of Visit Nepal Year actually prevented so many, I would say, pedophiles or, like predators from coming to Nepal that freely. So the issue is still vulnerable, because in Nepal, it's not only the one-time travelers or tourists who are found to be sexually exploiting children, but the frequent travelers actually were, like exploiting children, coming in contact with children, grooming children, and grooming their parents and guardians in a way that they became their trust. And they earned their trust, and they actually had all the freedom to take children wherever they wanted, like in the tourist destinations or trekking routes. And also they targeted village rural children as well. In Nepal, many cases actually are of children who are street connected or street based, but we have also found that so many children in the very, very rural setups were also targeted, and foreigners actually were able to go into these remote villages. They were able to set up their, like a modus operandi, inviting other people, and they based themselves in remote villages and had been able to exploit the children from the entire small village. Like there were 67 children sexually exploited by two foreigners who actually based themselves in that remote area for a couple of years. So there are so many gaps, as Shrinkala also outlined in her presentation, that we still need to have a robust mechanisms for the implementation of what we already have in paper, in laws and policies. In Nepal specifically, we now have amended Children's Act, and we have also included issues of sexual exploitation of boys, and sexual exploitation by foreigners as well. But when it comes to the implementation of these laws, there are so many challenges, not only because there is a lack of political commitment or anything, but also, as Srinkala again mentioned, lack of extradition treaties that we have with so many countries. We just have such treaties with very few countries, and we face so many challenges while we take the case to the court and we want to extradite the predators or the perpetrators, but that does not happen. We want to make it happen because in some of the countries of the destination of the predators or perpetrators, the law is pretty strong, stronger than what we have in Nepal. So that is actually preventing us from, doing justice to the children. So there have been, we also actually got involved in a very, very intensive drive together with the Central Investigation Bureau and our partners, Sathi and Sellard, to actually curb on the foreign pedophiles in a project called Watch with TTS Netherlands. And so many foreigners were also convicted in the last 3 to 4 years. And we still find that there are parents who are still so naive, who are facing economic challenges and are absolutely trusting foreigners as if they are saviors of their problems. And children also, although they know that they're going to be exploited, abused, but they're seeing it as the only option for survivor, or sometimes they are trapped in such a manner that they just cannot escape. They fear for their life if they tell about this to anybody. So there are so many young people who have gone through such situations, faced such situations from foreign pedophiles or traveler and tourists, and they just are silenced because the perpetrators do have power, not only of money but of the links and the power hierarchy as well. So but there has been an amazing support from CIB, Nepal Police, and they have taken the cases that we have brought in public very, very seriously. They worked very hard, and that's how we're able to prosecute so many foreigners in Nepal. So another issue that Gabriela actually brought was of volunteerism, and which is definitely happening here, and especially not only like one-time tourists are like going into orphanages are as tourists and offering some sweets or gifts, but there are childcare homes who actually survive on the money they actually get from the volunteers, and in these setups, no child protection or safeguarding measures are taken. And we are working very closely with an NCRC, National Child Rights Council, which is the nodal body for child rights and protection in Nepal. And we also work in network within the civil society organizations. And we have this network called Child Home Net, which Siwin, my organization, has initiated. And we are trying to have child protection and safeguarding policy for all the service providers or all the organizations who are running all kinds of care centers, be it transit center, shelter homes, in halfway homes, or long-term care center or orphanages. And there's a long way to go, because so few of the staff who look after the children are aware about these issues and are also trained. So we are asking NCRC to not only monitor, it's a monitoring body as well, and they have rescued so many children from these setups where children were not receiving proper care or are exposed to sexual violence, but also to provide them with technical assistance and help them in policies and provide orientations. Another very recent data that we have from the research that we carried out last year on sexual exploitation of children in online platform in Nepal also surprised us with the finding that boys are more vulnerable to all kinds of sexual abuse in the online platform. And at least 20% of children in Nepal have faced one or other kind of sexual exploitation, where they were not only sent, like abusive languages or sexualized materials, but also were pressurized, forced, threatened for life to send their videos by the perpetrators. And among these perpetrators, 11.32 were foreigners. So we see here a link that foreigners are actually targeting Nepali children, and they have easy access to it because Nepali children still lack, empowerment to say no to such kind of violence online. And there's still I think about 40% are still not aware about online violence, even though they have suffered one or other kind of sexual violence online. So there's a lot to work on towards empowering children online or offline, and let them understand the value of their body, the value of their integrity, and provide them with an environment where they are actually eager or are ready to share their pain or exploitative situation with adults, with parents, with teachers and caregivers as well. Because we also found in the research that some caregivers have been exploiting children, not only like physically, but also in the online environment. And we are working very, very closely with the private sector as well. And I'm very proud to share that we have been able to sign a memorandum of understanding with Hotel Association of Nepal and the Trekking Association of Nepal. And both these federations, these are federations, and they have their members in all 77 districts of Nepal. So they cover like thousands of service providers, thousands of business setups, small, medium, high level, and they have agreed to uh, uh, to um, uh, to incorporate child protection policy for their organization, which means this child protection policy that we produced together with Han and Tan is reaching out to thousands of business, and they have also endorsed a gender policy and ethical hiring policy. And in ethical hiring policy, we have tried to include points where they will do some like like background checks and child abusive background checks as well. And in the child protection policy, we have included sexual exploitation of children very explicitly. So we see this as a groundbreaking achievement where collaboration with civil society actually can make a huge difference in protecting children. Another issue that I want to bring in was we because 2020 was happening as a Visit Nepal year, we were very scared that so many travelers are going to come, and maybe like our children are going to be in much exploitative situation. So we joined hands with Nepal Tourism Board and the Ministry of Tourism, and we produced stickers, posters, which they displayed in Nepal Tourism Board's office and all their branch offices across Nepal. And also agreed that the homestay managements, which are becoming very popular in Nepal, actually bring so many adults closer to the children who are in and around the homestay, arrangements organized by parents or guardians. And children actually also help their parents in receiving guests and providing food and other services. So we also actually came into agreement that CWIN will provide training for all the homestay providers with the help of Nepal Tourism Board. But because Visit Nepal did not happen, that activity is halted, but we are still eager, and Nepal Tourism Board is also still willing to have this collaboration with us, and we hope that we will reach out to all the homestay providers who actually has to register with the Nepal Tourism Board or the government, and we will have provided orientation to all these service providers. So I think, stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sumnima, for this comprehensive overview that actually reflects specific legal and policy changes that needs to be introduced in Nepal to move ahead. And there are also points to take about human rights due diligence processes that need to include child rights lens from the very start when they are conducted to analyze a wide range of impacts that various industries can have on children's rights through their practice, operations, and supply chains. But it's also very good that you mentioned positive examples, because the private sector has a big role in protecting children, and actually there is a lot of private sector already involved in Nepal and other countries that take the stand on zero tolerance policy towards exploitation of children. And as you also mentioned, the offenders are not only foreigner, they're also local, regional. And when the tourism restarts, it can have also a positive force when it's developed in a sustainable and responsible way with child protection in focus. We look forward to working with the private sector across the country, and also thinking what new risks are emerging as as the offenders also change their modus operandi, and the vulnerabilities of children, of course, have been aggravated by the pandemic. So thank you, Sumnima, for this presentation. And I will now turn to Dr. Rinchen, Director General of SAIVAC. Thank you, Dr. Rinchen, for being with us. And could you reflect what are key steps for the way forward to address these challenges and advance changes in the region together with SAIVAC?
Thank you, Gabriela, and I'm very happy to be speaking after Shrinkalaji and Sumnimaji. Makes my life so much more easier. You know, both actually gave a regional overview as well as what substantive work is going on in the ground, particularly in Nepal, where so many things are actually happening that actually become important learning opportunities for the region and beyond. Now, I'm very happy that this second South Asia Forum of Business and Human Rights is taking place now. Better late than never. And it also comes at a crucial time, I think, when the COVID pandemic is now seemingly, you know, giving way towards a more normalization of life in our region and beyond. But I think it is so crucial for all of us who are actually responsible to attend to protecting the lives of children, to be conscious that we are actually entering into a much bigger high-risk time zone than in the past, in the sense that as the economy, you know, opportunities are being targeted, as acceleration of livelihood opportunities are being accelerated, the risk that will fall on children, women, and the vulnerable segments of the population are only going to be magnified. And as you know, something that continues to receive a lot of attention in my discourses in the region, there are a lot of concern in the you know, child rights community in South Asia, that while the COVID pandemic may have affected all sections of our life, but the brunt of the pandemic and the magnitude of how the response will be triggered for the pandemic, major, you know, responsibility may invariably fall on children, women, and the weaker sections of the community, because they are the ones, these are the target groups that will become incentives for profit making, incentives for, you know, businesses to be built again. And they are the ones that will invariably be considered dispensable, you see. So therefore, I think it is a huge, huge responsibility on all of us to actually be conscious of the challenges we are going to face as we move forward. And for SAIVAC, it is so crucial to understand the need for maintaining and building on what we have done till now. As Shrinkalaji mentioned, SAIVAC, in partnership with the Global Fund and ECPAT International and all our other network partners in the region, we have put together over a period of 3 years, starting with the decision taken in the fourth SAIVAC Governing Board meeting in 2016, SAIVAC Ministerial meeting in 2016, to come up with a regional action plan to end child sexual abuse and exploitation, including online safety. this regional action plan was probably one of the most widely consulted, most inclusive, convergent regional discourse that actually gave way to the regional action plan, which was endorsed in 2019 during the SIVOC's 8th governing board meeting. Now, one of the limitations of this regional action plan, and as we move forward, it's becoming even more important to underline that, is that the entry into the discussions or discourse of the regional action plan on child sexual abuse and exploitation, invitation or including the corporate sector and industry, the travel and tourism, came much later. And we actually had the privilege of, towards the end, with the experience that we had with what happened with the sectity discourse in Nepal, led by Swin and Sumnimaji's network. And then in Sri Lanka with the ECPAT Sri Lanka network, we actually used that opportunity to, strengthen the regional action plan. And today we have one of the key objectives of the regional action plan as corporate sector and industry. And we have led that down after consulting even, the TAN and Han representatives from Nepal, including, of course, also inputs from other countries' industry sector, including the South Asia Business Forum. Besides the regional action plan on child sexual abuse and exploitation, we also have a regional action plan on eliminating all forms of child labor, which came much before the child sexual abuse and exploitation. And this regional action plan on elimination of all forms of child labor was, is a testimony of the ongoing collaborative work with ILO and other partners, including, again, all the, networks of employers and workers federations related to different thematic areas or settings where child labor come picture. So these two regional action plans actually provide ample evidence of the need to further strengthen the work to put focus on how ethical business must be put in place and monitored effectively to ensure that children, women, and weaker sections of the communities do not become the pillars on which economies are built or profit making is built. And I think more than ever now, it is so crucial for SIVOC and the SIVOC national mechanisms, the 8 national mechanisms, to find opportunities to review the regional action plans more closely, fine-tune the regional action plans to accommodate the challenges or the push factors tabled to us by the COVID pandemic. The pandemic has unraveled enough fragility in our communities. So therefore, I think it is so crucial to get the regional action plans fine-tuned to accommodating all that, to ensure that the wonderful legal checklist review that ECPAT International has undertaken, which in a way very closely harmonizes the focus and expectations of what the regional action plans are supposed to come up with. I'm hoping that as we move into 21, implementation phase in the post-COVID pandemic phase, and as economies open up, as travel and tourism opens up, as our own ability to move and create better discourses and interactions open up, I think we need to make sure that the focus on ensuring accountability on state and political institutions must take precedence. I believe this is going to be the biggest challenge, in the sense that using my COVID pandemic phase experience, I have so many government entities changed and rechanged and changed. Even if I may just take an example of Nepal, I have now 3 sets of new governing board members and coordinators in the last 8 months. So you can imagine the loss of institutional memory, how much effort we need to put in terms of getting them, again, the new ones, getting them started. But the inspiring part is that the NACGs are grounded. The NACGs, the civil society movement, is not only grounded, the NACGs of all countries did excellent work in ensuring that while government entities were distracted in their response to containing the COVID pandemic overall, the NACGs ensured that the response towards protecting children not only got strengthened, but stayed focused in the areas that actually required this attention, besides continuing their lobby with governments and other institutions. So therefore, I think as we move forward, and I think this legal checklist does provide an excellent opportunity for SIVAC to harmonize the regional action plans, the monitoring element of the plan itself, by aligning it with the focus that the legal checklist has generated, and then see how to move the review process forward and get the 8 countries of SIVAC to endorse it and make it an ongoing process for generating not only effective implementation of the regional action plans at the national level, but also develop more better cross-regional discourse, and at the same time hold institutions responsible to deliver their services for children accountable. So for me, I think this definitely is an excellent opportunity, and I look forward to working with ECPAT International on that. But I must also mention that ILO and with other March, we are in intense discussion on now moving the regional action plan to end child labor, all forms of child labor, 2016-21, now reviewed and again, updated to move forward from 2021 to 2026. And I think that is again an opportunity where the 2 regional action plans can find some synchronized areas of focus to address, worst forms of child labor, at the same time, settings where not only worst forms of child labor occur, but also where, sexual abuse and exploitation of children happen all the time. And I want to pick up on the finding which Sumnimaji mentioned, and the vulnerability of boys for child sexual abuse and exploitation. I'm sure Gabriela and Shrinkala are aware, SIVAC during the COVID phase undertook a review of impact on child sexual abuse and exploitation during the COVID phase. And we actually took an exercise, also tried to get an understanding of what seems to be the major challenge in Afghanistan. And you'll be surprised to know that, sexual abuse of boys had become such an important issue that needs to be tackled. It's like the bull needs to be taken by the horn. And similar, similar incidences of abuse of children, particularly grooming of children or boys online, have emerged from all other countries. So therefore, I think this is again an area where ECPAT has already started to work on this. And I think we need to build it in and make this a little more prominent in terms of the discourse in the region. Now,
thank you very much, Dr. Rinchen. Thank you very much for your intervention. And it's great to hear about all the alignments between the national action plans and the work you're doing with ECPAT and with ILO and with other organizations. Thank you so much for bringing up the topic of boys, which is also part of an important work that ECPAT is doing research on and will be communicating on that more very soon. And we are really looking forward to working together with SciVac, launching the country analysis together and using the legal checklist as a practical tool that can be also internalized by SciVac and help track and reflect progress in South Asia. So I'm very happy that it can serve as an evidence and that it harmonizes well with the regional plan. And I will turn now to the next speaker, Insaf, who is a specialist at ILO, South Asia Sub-Regional Office in New Delhi. Insaf, in the light of the previous interventions, could you give us a broader picture that Dr. Rinchen also mentioned a little bit before on interlinkages between child labor and the worst forms of child labor, and how best can we address the challenge of ending exploitation of children together with ILO? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, and thanks to all the panelists who spoke before me. I want to present a couple of points which have already been mentioned by some panelists, but I want to reiterate them, looking at it from a ILO or a decent work perspective. So firstly, first point, there are many countries that have made or are making good progress in achieving SDG 8.7, which dedicates itself to eliminating child labor, forced labor, trafficking, and modern slavery. But one thing we need to remember is that no country can claim that they have achieved target 8.7 or that they have eliminated child labor until and unless they tackle the issue of sexual exploitation of children. So this is very important to look at it from a child labor perspective. It's not just a child abuse issue, but it's also a child labor issue. Second point that I want to emphasize is that particularly when it comes to sexual exploitation of children in the travel and tourism industry, we cannot forget that there are both demand and supply factors that are contributing to and facilitating this worst form of child labor. There are institutions behind it. There are big profits made, sometimes visible and sometimes hidden. There are also contractors, intermediaries, facilitators. There's a big network of labor supply going on, demand and supply. So therefore, the child labor, the labor aspect of it and the exploitation aspect of it have to be taken into consideration when it comes to addressing this issue. In this regard, labor laws, particularly those on child labor and forced labor, and also labor administration systems play a very relevant and important role. And those legal provisions can be effectively made use of to address the issue. On the other hand, we talk frequently about the demand factor. Right? We also need to study and understand and tackle the supply factor. A significant number, of course, of children and parents are coerced or are deceived or abusively recruited into child sexual exploitation. At the same time, there are others who are driven by push factors. Therefore, our approaches have to be more comprehensive and holistic to ensure that not only we eliminate the demand, but also eliminate the supply by enhancing dignified educational, vocational training, livelihood opportunities for children and their families. This resonates with what Dr. Rinchen mentioned a while ago, because the post-pandemic period, the economic recovery period, will be crucial in this sense. Third point, it is more effective when you tackle child sexual exploitation in the wider context of worst forms of child labor. Now, ILO Convention 182, which is one of the most ratified conventions, international conventions, identifies 4 worst forms of child labor. One is slavery and practices similar to slavery, including the sale of children and trafficking. Then second one is child prostitution and pornography. The third one is related to employing children, using children in illicit activities. And the fourth one is what we call hazardous work, or work that is harmful to the child mentally, physically, or morally. Now, sexual exploitation of children intersects with all these categories. Here, I wish to particularly highlight the importance of Article 3D, which talks about hazardous work. Now, some countries have, countries that have ratified the Convention 182 are expected to develop and announce a list of hazardous work that children should not be employed in at any cost. Now, some countries have made effective use of this to make sure that occupations and sectors that can cause high risk to pose high risk to children in terms of sexual exploitation are categorized as hazardous so that children do not work in those sectors. So it's not only looking at the act or the criminal act of exploiting children, but also looks at the environment and makes sure that the environment is safe for children, or that in any risky environment, children are not employed in the first place. Fourth point quickly is as much as our efforts need to focus, it also needs to take into consideration the big picture. So when there is no decent work, when a sector is not clean in terms of human rights, right? If it is simply difficult or sometimes not even feasible to protect one segment of, or just one vulnerable group, which are children. If there is sexual abuse of women, men, if there is exploitation in general, rampant in a particular sector, how can we, it's difficult to protect only one segment. Therefore, our approach has to also consider other decent work elements to make sure that human rights are respected. There is a culture of, there is a business culture that respects human rights. There is an emphasis from the business side to be clean, not only within their premises, but also within the supply chains that they are operating in. So that culture, that emphasis on a clean business is very important to empower the workers, empower the community, and make sure that they are not vulnerable to such abuses and violations of human rights. And finally, the complementarity of approaches. Now, there is the decent work approach, which looks at the issue from a child labor perspective. There is also the child protection approach or systems approach. Then you have the community-based approach to empower the community and to enable them to protect their children. There is also the criminal justice or the legalistic approach, which some of the panelists have talked about. Now, these approaches, as much as our own organizations believe in and want to promote these approaches, we have to recognize and make space for other approaches also to come and complement. It's one approach should not be at the cost of another approach, right? We cannot say that, okay, only this works or only that works. No, it works when all of us work. It works when things come into place from different angles and converge on the child to ensure that the child's rights are met. Therefore, this complementarity is crucial, and all the big agencies, small agencies, civil society organizations, UN, business, we all have a responsibility to complement each other and collaborate. So in this regard, I just want to quickly mention that there is a global initiative to bring partners, bring stakeholders together, which is called the Alliance 8.7, in which many, at least 2 countries, Nepal and Sri Lanka, are members from our region, but there are a number of other countries, as well as UN agencies, international NGOs, local NGOs who are members. This alliance focuses on accelerating progress towards achieving SDG goal target 8.7. It is also, this year is also the International Year to Eliminate Child Labor. Therefore, I believe that many who are participating in this discussion through their organizations, they have the opportunity to make pledges to take tangible action within the year to ensure that they have contributed to eliminating child labor. So I invite all the organizations that are participating to make a pledge towards eliminating child labor in this regard. And then the pledges can be found in the website www.endchildlabor2021.org. That is the website. If you Google it, it's easy to find. At the same time, I want to also share the information that we also have another dedicated session on child labor at the end of the conference, which is on Friday, Friday 19th at 4 o'clock. And I hope all of you will also be able to join to discuss more on on how to eliminate child labor in the informal sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this overview on how child sexual exploitation needs to be addressed as part of efforts on ending child labor and creating broader enabling environments to protect children, and mentioning complementary approaches that ECPAT is also working on. And we also invite everybody to join the session. Yeah, that is at the end of the forum on informal side of businesses and supply chains. So thank you very much for this contribution. We look also forward to working together with the ILO. This concludes our presentations for today. And now we can move on to discussion with the participants. And we have a few interventions when the participants will be unmuted by the technical team and can intervene and also ask questions to the panelists. So we can start with Kate Van Door from Griffith Law School from Australia. Kate, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Gabriella. And thank you to all of the panelists. What great presentation you've all given today, and just such a great regional overview of what is happening and what ECPAT has particularly been leading. So I just wanted to congratulate everybody on that. I have a really particular interest in what you're doing with this legal checklist, because it accords with some of the work we've been doing on the issue of orphanage trafficking. And as you would all be well aware, of course, orphanage trafficking is a form of exploitation that has links and connections to child sexual exploitation, and particularly in the travel and tourism industry. And by that, I mean when visitors and volunteers to childcare centres or orphanages really visit those places, taking advantage of the normalisation of access of international foreigners, and the unvetted nature of access to children in those centres to sexually exploit them. So my question really is, I really think the way you've constructed the gaps and then the checklist is fantastic. I particularly note checklist number 16, which talks about the regulation and monitoring of use of international volunteers in orphanages. I think that's fantastic too. And then that next point of harmonisation, which several of the panellists talked about today, what I'm wondering is how important is it to garner political will to achieve this harmonisation? And I'm assuming at both domestic and regional levels, and not just how do we garner that political will as advocates, perhaps working with government, but also with the businesses because of the interrelated nature of what's happening here. That's my question, Gabrielle.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for bringing up the issue of orphanage trafficking and your work that you're doing in Nepal that actually complements the work that ECPAT International is doing, and we'll look forward on cooperating closer together to pushing governments and businesses in closing these gaps. Any of the panelists would like to respond more to Kate's intervention?
Can I, Gabrielle?
Go ahead, Shrinkala.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Kate. In the regional level, I mean, Dr. Rinchen could also add on to this. Volunteerism is one of the things that we discuss, but to be very honest, we don't have a regional policy or, you know, a regional document that we could take forward, and the country level or the member countries could kind of take it forward from there on. So I think this is one of the things that we really need to focus on. And if Dr. Rinchen would also want to shed light on this, because based on the security checklist that we, or the legal analysis that ECPAT did, in none of the countries, in all 6 countries, there is no particular regulating policy document that would guide volunteerism. And in regards to country level, probably Sunil can add more in the context of Nepal. So Kate, thank you for highlighting that. And this is something we would kind of take it forward, and you know, the whole setting of checklist and the analysis, the objective of it is also kind of taking the elements that we think it still needs to be worked on at the regional level, and where we advocate and where we work on the policy documents to kind of make it more prominent as a concern to ensure protection of children. Thank you.
Thanks, Shrinkala. So Nima, do you want to add anything to that, or Dr. Rinchen?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kate, for your intervention. And the issue you raised of garnering political will is absolutely important. So important that when the policies have right directions and right vision, only can there be progress at the ground. So when the policymakers do not have intention or right vision, then so many things falter actually. And in Nepal, luckily, with the change of a lot of political scenario and amendment of laws are taking place, and some time back, the inter-country adoptions were halted because there were so many you know, conditions where children actually were made orphan on paper and were actually trafficked or sold by so many institutions, including institutions associated with the government. So that actually halted a lot of child trafficking. And in recent times, the government has actually stopped giving permission to new organizations who are starting orphanages or full long-term childcare centers, because they want to you know, monitor the situation and stop children being, you know, like flown in actually from remote areas to be placed in orphanages. And actually they make money out of bringing children, and they ask, like they like openly ask in their websites to pay this amount of money, volunteer, and come closer to children and work with children. So some of these things have happened because of political will, but it is not only enough. They need to have ongoing interventions. Sometimes these policies come for a period of time, but there is no continuity to it. So sustaining the interventions for a long-term positive impact is definitely important. And at all times, policymakers need to become more sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nima. Dr. Ringshen, would you like to add anything?
Actually, both my preceding speakers, addressed it. I just wanted to say that the regional action plan, during its formulation, did discuss the issue of volunteerism and how some are basically premeditated entries into such child protection homes or orphanages and centers, and not even those, even schools, remote schools, primary schools, where children are being targeted by such predators coming under the guise of volunteerism. But overall, I think there is a need to understand volunteerism in its spirit, true spirit. We need to identify who actually serve the need of children and who must actually be sieved out of this type of wonderful philanthropic work. I think the discourse needs to be put on the table, both at the regional level, so that there is a greater coordination and understanding among different countries, and then find a little more closer and fine-tuned application at the national level. But definitely this is an area of great concern, but it must not also undermine the wonderful work many voluntary organizations actually provide. So I think this is an area that needs to be tackled, and I'm very happy that it is part of the legal checklist.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ringshen. And that's also a topic that Rebecca Net and Better Care Network are working on. And ECPAT is also focusing on to move this, put for the standards with the private sector. So I would invite now Rebecca to intervene. Rebecca, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. It's been, and thank you to all the panelists. This has been a very, very interesting discussion so far and really rich and informative presentation. So thank you for that. And yes, Gabrielle, as you said, Better Care Network and also with my colleague Kate, who spoke earlier, have been looking at this issue of orphanage tourism in quite a lot of detail. And actually, a recent study that Kate and I have undertaken that will be published very soon looks at the impact of COVID on the functioning of private institutions. And Nepal was one of the countries that was factored into the study. And one of the things that came out of that study very clearly was there is an absolute intention for orphanages or childcare centres to recommence providing or facilitating opportunities for volunteers to come in and participate in orphanage tourism. And we know, as some of the speakers have already indicated today, the risks that poses to children, whether that be from the angle of the violation of child rights, in particular their right to family life, when it incentivizes institutionalization, or right up to the pointy end of looking at how that leads to situations of orphanage trafficking. So I guess my question would be, given that we know that there is an intention to recommence this practice, which has very serious implications for children's rights and for sexual exploitation and other forms of exploitation. But given that we are at, hopefully, the tail end of a pandemic that has caused a cessation of that practice, how can we really capitalize this opportunity that we have right now, this immediate opportunity to really circumvent that aspect of volunteerism from re-emerging? What of the policy implications or that particular aspect of the checklist, how do we actually start to step that out immediately so that we can get in front of this and not behind it when it does re-emerge?
Thank you, Rebecca, for your intervention. And that actually aligns very well with the efforts conducted with the private sector through the Code of Conduct for the Protection of Children from Sexual Exploitation in Travel and Tourism. And I would invite Damian Brosnan to respond to this question, and then other panelists can add.
Thanks, Gabriella. Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks to all the panelists. I think it's a really important issue, the idea of rushing back into tourism and tourism that potentially exploits vulnerable children through orphanages and residential care. I guess our perspective is in conjunction with ECPAT's work with government and authorities, is we try and connect with the private sector to engage them, to educate their staff and also their customers that maybe they should rethink why they're visiting or why they would like to visit orphanages, and to try and direct them towards alternatives. So it's a bit more of an industry-led approach. I think there is a real risk, as you said, as hopefully the pandemic is coming to an end or vaccinations come out, of a rush to get back to tourism, both to catch up for lost time and revenue, but also to find new places or to explore different things. And one of the things that we've sort of found is that people are going to move a bit more away from the big centres and towards more community-based or regional or rural areas. And there's a particular vulnerability for families and children in those settings, which is going to, I think, be increased in the coming months and years. The risk is also exacerbated by the vulnerabilities, the economic vulnerabilities that families have faced, especially those in places where there is a lot of, has been a lot of tourism. And so we're finding that children are being, taken out of school or are asked to do extra work to try and bring in some income for the family. And that is obviously a gateway to exploitation and vulnerability for them also. So I think it's really important to work together with the private sector, with government, with law enforcement, to educate not just customers and travellers, but also businesses and communities about why they might be vulnerable and what maybe they haven't thought of in terms of what vulnerabilities their children might be exposed to. And it was an interesting point that was raised, I think, in one of the questions about the difference between child labour as a cultural approach versus child labour as an exploitative approach. And it's a difficult one, because in a lot of places you have children working in restaurants helping their families, and how far do you go with that before it becomes an act of exploitation, if you're denying them school or if you're denying them time with their families. So we play a very small part as the code, and ECPAT plays a bigger part, but it's really good to hear this discussion and to be engaged in ideas to help protect children. Thanks.
Thank you, Damien. And I saw also some question from the attendees, and maybe Insa, if you would like to expand more on that. The participants are asking if you could tell more about the push factors that lead to exploitation of children.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I think I tried to. Okay, I tried to explain in my written answers as well. I mean, of course, as many of us know, poverty is one of the biggest push factors. But also, poverty doesn't come. I mean, poverty is a very abstract term, and sort of the cause and excuse for everything. But I think that has to be broken down a little bit further. Looking at it from a work perspective, definitely a lot of poverty happens because of a lack of decent wages for families, for parents, who are working, and that pushes children to complement the family income through additional work. And with that starts the vulnerability. And why parents don't have decent wages is because they are not empowered to collectivize, bargain, and fight for their rights or ask for their rights. So it's a sort of vicious cycle. So there are a number of things to be addressed in that, but the wage perspective is very important. If decent work and decent wages can be ensured, that will reduce vulnerability and a lot of push factors that are associated with that. And then social protection is another important thing, because even when families do have income, they might lose that income due to illness, due to death occurring in a family, etc. So those gaps, the shocks, family level economic shocks, act as push factors for children to engage in child labor and they become vulnerable to exploitation. Those economic factors have to be addressed. Basically, I mean, the child sits in between a number of worlds. You know, one is the world called the community. The one is the world called the family, and then the one is the world called the work. So the world of work, you know, so all these paradigms have to be taken care of, this is where, I mean, the work paradigm also has to be taken care of in order to ensure that the family has sustainable or sustained income, and children don't fall into vulnerable situations. So this is what I meant by push factors, and those push factors, they play a big role in pushing children towards child labor and towards exploitative situations. There was another question that I wanted to add to, which was about, you know, I think Damien also touched on that, you know, whether child labor is cultural, you know, whether it is family, whether it is learning. Now, I think one point, you know, I'm not going to answer the whole question, but, you know, one part of it is to understand what child labor is. We are not talking about child work, right? It's not about banning every child from working at any cost, right? You know, we are not, you know, nobody's saying that a child should not work at all till the child reaches 18. No, that's not feasible, and that's not what is meant in the conventions. The convention distinguishes between child work and child labor. Child labor is a technical term used for a certain category of work which is harmful to the child, or that the child is too young to be engaged in. So if the child is too young for work, or if the child is engaged in a work that is not appropriate for the child to engage in, then that becomes child labor. And child labor definitions are you know, quite you know, sort of described in detail in terms of the number of hours, you know, if you are between, I mean, it also depends on the legal system of the country. So there are slight variations in years, you know, the age, etc. So in general speaking, I mean, in most countries, the children are allowed to work for a limited number of hours, less than 36 hours per week. If they are more than 15 and the work is not harmful, under supervised conditions, they are allowed to work. So from between 12 to 14, there's something called light work mentioned in the convention. Again, I'm not going to describe technical details, but the point is, it's not about abolishing work. It's about abolishing or eliminating child labor, which is the type of work that is harmful for children. So once this is clarified, I mean, our tasks becomes more focused and easier to distribute. I mean, of course, it's a very challenging task, you know, but once you get rid of that confusion, it becomes focused, and it can focus and ensure that if work is an option for the child, that work has to be legal and has to be appropriate for the child at the appropriate age, right? So
thank you very much, Insaf. I'm sorry because we have time constraints. Do you want to add last sentence conclusion to your response?
Yeah, I mean, just to conclude that, you know, in all these discussions, you know, although we look at child sexual exploitation, which might appear, I mean, which the link between child labor and that might not appear very apparent it is very important to look at it from a child labor perspective as well, as much as we look at it from the legalistic or the child protection or the community empowerment perspective. That would be my call for action. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Yes, and all the approaches that that we need to bring forward together. Let me just allow to speak Sarin very briefly, because Sarin, you participate in the first UN Forum on Business and Human Rights in India last year, and you wanted to share an example on what you put in practice from that forum. So just we see, how the things are being brought forward after events like that. Very briefly, over to you.
Thank you, Gabriela. And thank you to all the panelists for the wonderful presentations. During the conference, before the forum, we had already had an MOU with Hotel Association Nepal, that's Han, that has about 300 member organizations, and Checking Agencies Association of Nepal, that has more than 1,500 member organization. We had already a MOU with them to work in the sector of children and gender. But after the conference, we were able to convince them to form robust policies for them and their members to work in child protection, gender, ethical hiring, and decent workplace. So they have now 4 policies in place, and those policies are based on guiding principles of business and human rights. That's protect, respect, and remedy. So they have all the settings. They have a complaint mechanism where them and their member organizations can call in if they see any kind of violations witnessed by their members. So they have a reporting mechanism. So they have a system like a government system called TMS. So they can tourist management system. So they can report those cases there. So that is one of the major accomplishment that we achieved after the forum. And why we focused on Han and Tan, one was because it was Visit Nepal 2020, which got postponed because of COVID. But the next is like we have seen a sharp increase in pedophilia cases by foreigners and child trafficking and sexual abuse of children. So to train the hotel staff and trekking guides they are the first line of defense, so they know how to spot perpetrators. About what we taught them, what is good touch, what is bad touch, what you have to report, what is the complaint mechanisms, and we also coordinated with Nepal Tourism Board to form all these policies. Now we have these policies there, but there are further works needed to be done, like with Restaurant and Bar Association of.
Thank you very much, Sarin. That's really great example, and it's really good to see how the things are brought forward after the discussions that are organized at the forum. We have time constraints, so we have just a very few minutes from finishing up this session, so we will have to stop here. And thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. Some may be answered individually. I encourage you to approach the panelists after this session if some of the questions were not answered directly here. And I would like to thank to all the panelists for all your presentations, and to all the attendees for sending your questions and intervening. And I think we are concluding this session with a clear way forward for an accelerated action in the regional response for eradicating worst forms of child labor, and connections that were made and that we can continue after this session to work closely together. I would also like to thank the organizers of the forum for having hosted this session. That is the United Nations Working Group on Business and Human Rights, UNDP, and the ILO. So with that, I would like to bring this session to the close and thank again everybody, and we'll be in touch and continue our discussion and work together. Thank you very much.
Namaste. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Keep
Thank
smiling.
you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.